Hey everybody, I got a video here for you today. And those of you new to my channel, my videos can be of many different forms. Sometimes I share videos from other channels. Sometimes I share interviews or lectures. Sometimes my videos are well thought out and I take many days to look for information. Some are spur of the moment. Today's the spur of the moment video. And I have been going over comments and questions. And I have had one on the horned giant supposedly found in Pennsylvania. And I had a couple questions on that. And I did a video coming from this area a few weeks ago. So I thought I would talk about this today because I can add a few things and just basically get down to what was actually found here and what wasn't. But this is called Tioga Point. And let me just back up here. Now I'm doing this spur of the moment, but this is known as Tioga Point, and it was also known as Spanish Hill, the area where these remains were found. And you notice here, if I back out a little, it's at where these two rivers split. This seemed to have been a sacred point. And does that look a little bit like the Nile and where it kind of goes into the delta? If you were to take away all the houses and city here, it would look a little bit like it, but the most sacred points seem to be right where the split was here. And remains were found here. Yes, they were. Was a horned giant found here? Well, when looking into history, and to be a good researcher, what you have to do is you have to be able to trace information, where information came from. You have to look at the researchers. Are they writing with an agenda? Are they just writing to make money and sell books and to sensationalize things? You have to be able to trace information. But this has been a story that has been kind of widespread, Nephilim websites and this and that. But what actually was found here? Was there a horned giant found here? Well, no, there wasn't. How did this information get started? Well, it can be tracked. Here is the landscape today. And here is where those rivers split. And today there is a Tioga Point Museum, and there are some mounds, old mounds here. But this is pretty well developed area today. But interest came to light when a skeleton was accidentally unearthed in the 1880s. And that really led to the excavation work here, done in 1916. And that date should be remembered. The excavation was done in 1916 because these reports of this horned giant seem to all go back to initial report that sensationalized things and combined two reports really into one. But this is Tioga Point, also known as Spanish Hill, where a giant skeleton reportedly was found. And how big was that skeleton? Well, it was about 7 feet tall. We do appear to have a prehistoric race of people that were as tall as the tallest humans today. Were they giants? No, but they were very tall people, and I find that very interesting. We have reports of tall people coming from different areas of the world and different texts. Well, seems here in the ancient United States there actually was a race of very large people, but separating fact from fiction, that becomes very difficult because you have reports from the 1880s and the early 1900s. Some of them are sensationalized, some of them are accurate, so it all becomes a giant conundrum in trying to separate fact from fiction. But this is the area. But where did this story of the horned giant get started? Well, it seemed there was a combination of a couple reports. Now, where does this story of the horned giant, where does that come from? All these things in recent times, and people trying to associate this find with Nephilim or something totally sensationalized. Where does this come from? Well, a lady by the name of Sue Crawford in 1992 wrote a book called Mysteries of the Unexplained. And people have kind of latched onto this and use this for sources of their websites where they're trying to make something really that is more than it actually was. Her source for her book was a publication of Pursuit magazine. And what is Pursuit magazine? It was popular in the 60s and the 70s. And what I can associate Pursuit magazine to is Weekly World News or tabloid grocery market crap magazines. That was her source. And then people, over time, just use that story in their sensational stories about a supposed horned giant who actually never existed. But there was large skeletons found here, and some of them, strangely enough, had deer antlers and copper attached to their head. But she seemed to combine a report about one of these skeletons having the deer antlers in the head, and this is the one I did on the seat mounds, and some strange skulls that were discovered. What was actually found here? It was a fairly large skull with deer antlers kind of embedded in the skull and then copper wrapped around it. And these people seem, when they buried their important leaders, these leaders had copper really covering them. Copper seemed to be super important to these people. Were they getting it from northern Michigan? Well, that seems to be a very good likelihood. But copper, obviously very important. They had breastplates of copper. But one lady combined the reports of the giant skeletons with the report of the deer antlers and wrote in her book, obviously to sensationalize it and probably to make some more money. She says that there was horns in the skull, like this guy actually had horns, which is totally BS. Now here is an old map that was done in the 1700s of this place called Spanish Hill. And the person here doing the documentation describes this as having earthwork surrounding this whole place with a ditch like a henge. And this is 10 acres. So there is a large earthwork around here. And then you notice here 3 what are described as pits, not mound. He has pits written up here. But that shape looks certainly familiar. But this place had a name a long time ago. This was an ancient Indian village that has been totally lost to time and it seems memory. Now, going back over to Google Earth, let's just find Spanish Hill here. And I guess this is private property here today. And that kind of bugs me a little. But this is Spanish Hill, that area that had a giant henge around it. And this is the private property today. And what is that? This appears to be some sort of mound, and I don't know what, if they're growing something, but this just looks very weird to me. And this is what it looks like. Spanish Hill today, a giant henge, and there was a city up here at one time. Earthworks, and this is what it looks like today. Not much to be seen. Private property. This was the ancient site of a town called Carantuan, built on what is called a glacial moraine, and I would have no idea what that is if I didn't follow the work of Randall Carlson. Interest got started here in 1883. That is when the initial discovery was made. It says in 1883, while digging a ditch for indoor plumbing to the home of Louise Wells Murray, an ancient graveyard was uncovered. It was excavated from that point for many years to follow. This was the event that actually started the huge interest in our local Native American prehistoric cultures and archaeology, and also was the inspiration for Ms. Murray to go on to found the Tioga Point Museum. In 1885, the owner, like his forebears, long refused to examine the grave at the center of the Murray Garden plot, but at last had consented to celebrate the formal opening of the Tioga Point Historical Museum, and on June 27, 1895, the work was begun. The circle of stones proved to be over a subculture about 3 to 5 feet. Finally, 2 large flat stones full of Devonian fossils proved to be the covering to a skeleton of 6 feet or more in height. And these skeletons that were found here approached 7 feet tall, and maybe one of them was 7 feet tall. Very large for that time period. But can somebody tell me what a Devonian fossil is? I'm just not quite sure about that one. In 1916, an expedition was funded by George Hay, the Hay Museum founder, and led by Warren K. Moorhead to discover and gain artifacts from the cemeteries of the Susquehannocks. And that Warren K. Moorhead, I mentioned him in an article, and that is how you spell his name. Now, after that woman wrote that book and combined the reports of the skeleton with the deer antlers and the large skeletons being found into a horned giant, then a whole bunch of people wanting to make money off a sensational story took this and ran with it and based their research on that story that she changed. And you notice here, the woman misspelled Moorhead in that initial report where she changed the story, and then everybody else spells Moorhead wrong, so they're all basing their information on that twisted story that the woman wrote in that book. And you also notice they misdated here. This group of researchers, archaeologists, professors, they were there in 1916, but misdates it, and then that gets into all these other stories. You have to know how to trace history. You have to know how to separate the BS from the facts. Sometimes one story changes the whole road of history for some stories. Now, Louise Wells Murray, she had plumbing installed into her home, and they found that ancient graveyard and that large skeleton, and that led to her interest in this lost history coming from the ancient United States. And she wrote this book. That one discovery led to her whole interest and her whole lifetime research. And it says, "This shall be written for the generations to come." So I'm going to share it because I know a few of my subscribers are still involved in the lost art of reading. And I think it's a very important art. Now, let's just read what was found here in 1916. And remember, a large skeleton was found here, approaching 7 feet tall in the 1880s. But when researchers came to this area, maybe they found a more recent cemetery. It says, a large cemetery these people was found near the mouth of the Chemung River near Athens, Pennsylvania, in which 57 skeletons were discovered. With the skeletons were whole and broken pottery vessels, native clay pipes, triangular arrowheads of stone, and a few articles. We found a few scattered fragments of pottery on the surface, nothing whatever in any of the test holes which we dug. All the members of the expedition were disappointed in the very poor results in the investigation. I desire to state that Spanish Hill, famous in local history as well as literature, was a great disappointment, and that comes from W.K. Moorhead, spelled with 2 O's. So it seems the 1916 excavation, they did find a cemetery, but it was a bit of a disappointment, probably a more recent cemetery. But what about that discovery of that skeleton, that large skeleton in the 1880s? Well, it says this, and this is described by a Professor Holbrook. It says, judging from the thigh bone, he must have been 7 feet tall. The skull was much larger than usual, very thick, the forehead unusually receding, the top flattened. The jaws were extremely strong, full of large, perfect teeth. Altogether, the remains seemed to be those of a brutal and very powerful giant. With him were found a few small flints and a rude flint axe head. Here is one pick from 1905, and this is labeled Spanish Hill, and I'm sure that depicts this site right here. There was an ancient settlement here flourishing 400 or 500 years ago, and it seems there was very old remains that were found here that led to excavations done. Tioga Point in 1916, but one story, there was 2 stories that were combined into one sensational story, and it appears to be total nonsense, a sensationalizing of history. But that is a little history of the Tioga Point and Spanish Hill site. Very large skeleton was found here. Seems to be of somebody from very long ago. People that were scattered all across the United States. We have a very fascinating history, a lost history in the United States, and I'm just getting started. Hope you thought that was interesting. You all have a very nice day.